Hello and welcome to this first series of the Mind Your Migraine program. I'm Naji Riashi. I'm a neurologist by training, and I'm very happy to be hosting today Mrs. Farah Ashoka, a lady who suffers from migraine. We hope to be able to show you today the difference between a bad headache and what a migraine is. Welcome, Farah.
Thank you very much, doctor.
I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Would you mind telling us when was the first time you encountered a migraine?
As far back as I can think, I was in school, must have been around 12 or 13 years old. I remember many times being sent to the nurse's clinic just to, be seen to, and given a couple of paracetamols in those days and made to lie down for a few minutes and then sent back to class. And I still remember many times my teacher writing a note in my diary saying, have her eyes checked because she's constantly complaining of headaches. And my father did. I grew up without a mother, so my father did. And my eyesight was perfect. But in those days, I think nobody even knew there was a thing such as migraine. Going back many years, I remember I must have been around 23 or 24 when the episodes started increasing, and maybe around the age of 25, I was at my job at the time. I was experiencing maybe 10 or 15 episodes a month.
Wow. Well, that's very commonly the case. 36 million people in the US alone suffer from migraine, but only 25% of them are diagnosed. So what you're telling me is very common, and it is the reality for several people that suffers from this disease, unfortunately.
Like I said, it started off by maybe 3 or 4 a month, increased to maybe 10, 15. The time when I finally saw a neurologist, I was at about 29 migraine days a month.
Wow, that's quite a bit.
So like they say, the more migraines you have, the more you get.
Yeah. You mentioned that you had this when you were first still at school. How did that affect your relationship with the other students? How did they treat you? Were you treated any different?
I'm not sure if I was treated any different, but you always think that people think that you're making an excuse to get out of class. I'm sure people were saying that, oh, there she goes again with her excuse to skive from class, but which wasn't the case. I was a fairly good student, so that wasn't the case. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a misconception people don't understand. So in fact, you can tell us why is there such a big misconception between headaches and migraines?
Yeah, actually, because any headache could be debilitating, but migraine is a very specific condition, and part of it is having the migraine. It's a genetically predisposing condition. When you have the proper triggers, then this brings up an electrical depolarization of the brain that will release a lot of neuroinflammatory peptides in the brain that will lead to the formation of the migraine, which has several different phases. We can talk about this a little bit later on, if you don't mind. I just want to know also, how did this affect your job?
So you could get to a stage where you stop explaining yourself and you just internalize the pain, do whatever medicine you can take whatever you need to, and then just get on with life. Except what you're actually going through physically and inside is invisible to others. So I mean, I just didn't give myself any days off from work, or I just carried on. I just took medication, but not that much of it helped. But it started to physically show on my face because my usually starts on my left side. So my left eye would get bloodshot red. My eyes looked as if I've just woken up and so puffy and swollen. My face would start to swell up a little bit. And I was visibly looking ill. So, but it didn't eventually. After 25 years, I had to give up my job because I was put on a prophylaxis that made me very dopey. I had started to lose my vocabulary. I couldn't remember words. My family, fortunately, was very supportive and was aware of what was happening, and which was one of the side effects of some of the medication that I was on. And they would be around me if we were in a setting of people and we were at a party, and they knew that I'd forget words. So they would just be there to help me and jump in and, say the word for me. So I was losing words simple as and the, and even just simple words.
Yeah.
And I don't know. So that was difficult, and eventually I did give up my job.
So your quality of life took quite a blow because of that, and your family life must have been affected by it as well.
Extremely so, because you never know when it's going to start. It could be at the most. It could be my daughter's wedding, for instance. I still remember being on medication on the day itself, because I think migraine brain is such an excitable brain that anything that you're planning for, you know that it could hit you anytime. So, doctor, can you explain probably to me and the audience what is the difference, the key differences between just a headache, bad headache, and a migraine? Why such a misconception?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. As we've mentioned before, migraine is a condition by itself. It's a disease. So part of this disease will encompass having a headache, but it's not just a headache. Migraine has 4 phases: a prodromal phase, an aura, the headache itself, and a postdrome. During the prodromal phase, people become really irritable sometimes. They become confused. They cannot concentrate well. They yawn a lot. They crave food, and they start usually carbohydrates, so they stuff themselves with chocolate, which is why there is a misconception that chocolate causes migraine. It's actually the craving for chocolate that is happening beforehand, and this could take anywhere between a couple of days before until a few hours before the migraine. So that would be the prodromal phase. Then 30% or 1/3 of the patient with migraine would have an aura, which is most commonly a visual aura with scintillating lights, spots in the middle of the field where you cannot see properly, zigzag lines mirroring aspects that you start to see in your face. But not just that, some people also have a sensory aura in which their face becomes numb or tingly, areas around the cheek, the mouth, etc. And sometimes they have a motor aura where they become weak even in their face and other parts of the body.
That could be quite scary, doctor, because you could mistake it for having a stroke. I
Sure.
mean, how can you differentiate between?
Well, this is when you need to seek medical attention, because some testing will be done, a proper physical exam and the history would be taken, and then you can move forward from there. After the aura, which usually precedes the headache by about 20 to 30 minutes, you develop the headache. And the headache has to be very intense. I mean, it's at least moderate to severe in intensity. And it would last anywhere between 4 hours to up to 3 days, usually, unless it lasts longer when you go into a situation called status migrainosus. Now, the headache is most commonly unilateral, but this is also a myth, because it can affect both sides at the same time.
Okay.
So if a headache is bilateral, it does not necessarily mean that it's not a migraine, but migraines are usually more commonly unilateral, and they alternate sides. So if the headache is always happening on the same side, this is a red flag for us, and we need to look for other causes. It can prefer a side over the other one, and it can start more so on the right or on the left, but every now and then it will affect the other side first as well before it spreads and involves the whole head if need be. Then it is associated, as we've mentioned before, with nausea or vomiting, with being very sensitive to light, which we call photophobia, or very sensitive to sounds, which we call phonophobia, or very sensitive to smells even. You cannot, I have a patient that told me, I cannot walk into an elevator if there is a smell of perfume. This will tip me off completely. Sure. And so that is usually associated with the headache. And then after the acute phase is done, the patients feel just exhausted, as if they were, a patient told me, I feel like I've been run over by a truck. For
It's
a day
true.
or two after that, they're confused, they're not really up to par, they're not back to their baseline level of activity, and they would like to stay home and rest. So this becomes a disease entity, and there is usually a genetic predisposition. We commonly see young ladies affected more so than men. So, and then we have a family history. They will have a mother, an aunt, somebody, a sister with the headache, and this would be a predisposing factor for them to develop the headache. So it's well defined. It is genetically predisposing, and then you have to have the triggers, the environmental factors that have to come into play to develop the headache as well. A certain patient population is affected more than others, women more than men, younger people. Now, usually hormones also affect the headache
Can be
quite
a
a bit.
trigger.
Yeah, I mean, some ladies come to me and they say we only have the headache when we have our menstrual period or when we are ovulating. And usually with menopause, the headache starts to dwindle down and disappears. At least that's what happens in the majority of the patients that we know. What about your experience?
My experience is that they progressively got worse.
Oh, yeah.
I went through all the different phases of a womanhood. And unfortunately, I'm still waiting for that day when they would subside. I know that today the prophylaxis that I'm on, the access to having proper abortive medication, I mean, that's my lifeline right now.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, many people I know, when they're getting dressed, the first thing they put in their purse when they're going out for a ball or whatever is a lipstick. For me, my abortive meds go into the purse before anything else, because that's just something that I cannot leave the house with. So, doctor, now that you've described all the different aspects of a migraine, and it sounds like a very complex disease, where are we today in terms of advancements of medication, and what's available out there for people who are suffering from this disease?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because we've made tremendous progress. We went from having repurposed medication that were used for prophylaxis for this disease, and that because they are repurposed, they don't hit targets, so they don't work very well. So most commonly people don't stick to them. They take them for a short period of time, and then they realize that either they have side effects like what you have experienced, or that the medication is not efficacious enough, so they stop taking them, to having first abortive directed treatments that were very helpful. And I have a lot of patients like you who would not leave the house without them
it,
in their purse, in their car, in their work, etc., so that it would always be available if need be, because it has to be taken immediately at the onset of the headache for it to be as efficacious as possible, to now having had several different types of treatment that were used. There is the injections that we made in the face, head, and neck that were approved by the FDA. And now we have lately subcutaneous injections that we can get, that have really been such a joy to have, because they are almost like a miracle. They cut down on the attacks, the number of the attacks, the longevity of the attacks, and not just the attacks themselves, but the burden of pain altogether. You might have an attack that would last 2-3 hours instead of lasting 3 days, and it might be on an intensity scale from 1 to 10 down to a 2, from an 8 or a 9 or a 10 sometimes. Right. So this improves the quality of life of patient tremendously.
And the abortive meds can work better as well. When you do have to take an abortive medication, the effect of it is much quicker.
Exactly. And it's completely different from the old generation abortive that you mentioned. You probably were on, that are with significant side effects, unfortunately.
Yes.
So we're making a real good progress in treating migraines now that we have medications that are designed
for migraine
for
itself.
migraine, and they are only going to be helpful in a case of a migraine headache. They will not work on other types of headaches, which makes them so specific, so efficacious, and with a very good side effect profile.
Excellent.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Farah, very much for being with us on this Mind Your Migraine episode and telling
Thank you,
us your
doctor.
story.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, and looking forward to having you with us on future episodes.